Welcome, dear listener, to the Sleeping Hourglass. Our journey this evening carries us through painted corridors and hidden chambers into the silk-curtained heart of a fading empire. We will step softly into the story of a woman history remembers as the last Empress of China. Her name was Cixi, once a concubine in the Forbidden City. She rose higher than anyone thought possible, guiding an empire through its twilight years. Her reign was marked by both beauty and fracture, by tradition colliding with change, by a dynasty shimmering even as it began to fall apart. And if you enjoy this peaceful space we share, you're always welcome to return. You might even choose to subscribe or leave a gentle like, not out of pressure, but simply as a way of keeping this corner of stillness alive so the hourglass may be turned again. The story begins not in the gilded chambers of Beijing, but in the quieter north, among the Manchu clans whose rhythms beat closer to the earth. There in 1835, a girl named Yanara is born. Her world is not yet framed by red lacquer gates or walls the color of vermilion. Instead, it is woven with the textures of her family's modest standing, the sound of wind moving across plains, the echo of hooves on frozen earth, the cadence of ancestors remembered in prayers. She is not a daughter of emperors, not of princes, but of bannermen. Her lineage ties her to the fabric of the Manchu 8 banners, yet her station is humble. She grows in a household where duty is ordinary, not dazzling. Yet even in her youth, those around her notice the poise in her stillness, the depth in her gaze, as though she carries within her something that waits to unfold. History often begins quietly. The sound of a stream before it becomes a river, the hush of a lotus seed before it rises to the surface. So too, Yehanara's life begins without spectacle, though her steps are already being drawn toward the center of an empire. Far from her childhood home, the Forbidden City stands, a labyrinth of halls, courtyards, and chambers, enclosed by crimson walls and golden roofs. It is a world both magnificent and suffocating, a place where silence is law, where gestures weigh more than words, where shadows themselves seem to bow. It is an empire within an empire, a city of ritual where each breath belongs to the throne. For centuries, emperors have ruled here, some wise, some cruel, some wary under the weight of the dragon throne. Within these walls, the great dynastic rhythm beats like a distant drum. It is toward this drumbeat that Yehanara's life will eventually turn. The path is neither direct nor fully her choice. In 1851, the Shan Fong Emperor ascends to the throne. His reign begins amid tremors. Rebellions stir in the countryside. Whispers of foreign intrusion grow louder, and the empire shows its first cracks. Yet within the palace, tradition continues. From across the land, young women are summoned to Beijing, their fates tested in the annual selection of consorts. Yehanara, at 16, is among them. For her, it is as if a gate opens, one she cannot step back from. She enters the Forbidden City not as a conqueror, not as a bride, but as a concubine, one among many chosen for the emperor's service. Her name is changed, as names always are, when lives are remade. She becomes known as Lady Lan, ranked low in the hierarchy of the harem, her future uncertain, her place precarious. Imagine her first steps through the Meridian Gate, the sheer immensity of walls stretching higher than she has ever seen, the clang of gates closing behind her, the sensation of a life left outside. The Forbidden City is not merely a palace, it is a universe. Each courtyard is another threshold, each corridor another labyrinth. Servants glide like shadows, Eunuchs measure their words with precision, concubines move as if their sleeves weigh down their very lives. In this place, beauty is not adornment but a form of survival. For Yehanara, survival becomes her first lesson. She observes quietly, never too bold, never too silent. She learns the rhythms of ritual, when to bow, how to smile, when to let silence answer more than words. Her intelligence is not the kind that announces itself, but the kind that listens, remembers, and waits. The harem itself is a world within walls, ruled by etiquette, competition, and hidden daggers of rivalry. Dozens of women, each draped in silk, each hoping to catch the emperor's glance, all know that their fortunes hinge on a moment's favor. For most, the years stretch into obscurity. Yet history is not equal in its choosing, and the emperor's gaze lingers, eventually, on Yehanara. She bears herself with a mixture of restraint and quiet confidence that sets her apart. She is not the most dazzling in beauty, but there is something enduring in her presence, a lotus that does not fade in shallow waters. In time, she rises above her rank, gaining the title of noble consort. She carries within her the poise of someone who understands that fortune is fragile and must be grasped carefully, as one holds a candle against the wind. The forbidden city, for all its glittering surfaces, is a place of constant fear. Behind carved screens and painted walls, whispers travel faster than footsteps. A misstep can end a life, a misplaced word can silence a future. Yet Yehanara moves with patience, like water that shapes stone not by force but by persistence. And then the moment that changes everything. In 1856, she gives birth to a son, not just a son, but the emperor's only surviving male heir. Within the palace, where lineage is power and motherhood is destiny, this child transforms her standing. From concubine, she becomes the mother of the future emperor. The shift is not just personal but imperial. Her name and fate are now entwined with the throne itself. But that is a story for another chapter. For now, let us linger in this first image of her. The young girl from the northern banners, standing beneath golden roofs, her eyes reflecting both awe and resolve. She does not yet know the storms she will face, the rebellions, the foreign invasions, the court intrigues, the centuries of judgment. She knows only that she must walk with care, that each step within these walls is a step into history. The lotus has been placed in the waters of the forbidden city. The river has begun to carry her forward. From the hush of her girlhood to the golden silence of the forbidden city, Yehanara's steps have led her into the heart of power. Soon, the birth of a single child will alter not only her destiny, but the destiny of an empire. And with it begins her first true rise. In the great hush of the forbidden city, where footsteps echo against marble courtyards and every glance is measured, fate often turns in silence. For Yehanara, now Lady Lan, that silence breaks with the cry of a newborn. The year is 1856, and from her chambers comes the sound that will ripple through the empire. The first breath of the emperor's only surviving son. A single birth can alter the geometry of power. Where once she walked as a concubine, her place uncertain, she now carries the future in her arms. The child she cradles, small and fragile, is more than a son. He is the continuation of a dynasty, the thread upon which the weight of centuries rests. In that instant, her life fuses with his, and together their fates begin to rise like two stars bound in a single constellation. The Shanfeng Emperor, weary from the burdens of rebellion and encroaching foreign powers, sees in this child not only an heir, but but a promise. His reign is already shadowed by turbulence. The Taiping Rebellion rages in the south, the Opium Wars carve humiliations into the empire, and whispers of weakness travel across seas. Yet here, in the quiet chambers of his harem, the emperor holds continuity, and in the mother of this child he begins to see not just a consort, but an anchor. Within the Forbidden City, every shift is noted, every ripple recorded in silence. With the child's birth, Lady Lan's status transforms. She is elevated to the rank of noble consort Yi, her title carrying the fragrance of favor. Other concubines, once her rivals, bow with tighter lips, their silks rustling like restrained storms. Eunuchs watch her door more closely. Servants carry her trays with greater care. The invisible hierarchy reshapes itself around her presence. Motherhood within the palace is unlike motherhood beyond its walls. A child of the Dragon Throne belongs not to the warmth of one woman's arms, but to the empire itself. Yet, for Lady Yi, as she is now known, the connection is deeply human, deeply maternal. She watches her son's tiny fingers curl, hears his breathing soften into sleep, feels the delicate pulse of his life against her chest. In his innocence, she finds both joy and terror, for in him lies her power, but also her vulnerability. The boy is named Zaishon, and with that name, the threads of history tighten. He will be known to the world one day as the Tongqi Emperor, but in these first years, he is simply her child, her small and precious one, growing within walls so vast that even his cries seem to vanish before reaching the gates. The palace, meanwhile, hums with watchfulness. The Empress consort Su En, wife of the emperor and highest-ranked woman of the harem, regards Lady Yi with a mixture of formality and acceptance. Tradition requires harmony between them, and for a time, harmony holds. The emperor's affection is divided, but his recognition of Lady Yi's importance cannot be denied. She has given him what none of the others could. Within her chambers, Lady Yi begins to learn the subtle art of power. She speaks softly, but her words are remembered. She moves slowly, but each movement carries intention. Power in the Forbidden City is not seized by shouts, but gathered like water, drop by drop, until it fills a vessel. She senses this, though she does not yet wield it. For now, she is still more mother than strategist, her attention fixed upon the boy whose laughter brightens corridors otherwise heavy with protocol. Outside the palace walls, the empire grows unsteady. The Taiping rebels, proclaiming visions of a heavenly kingdom, march across provinces, their armies vast, their fervor unyielding. Foreign fleets anchor along China's shores, their cannons gleaming with industrial strength. Silver drains from the treasury, coffers grow thin. The emperor grows ill under the weight of his reign, his health failing with each passing season. For Lady Yi, these tremors are felt only in whispers, yet even whispers reach her ears. She knows that if the emperor falters, the boy she holds will become more than a child. He will become the vessel of continuity, and she, his mother, will become something more than a consort. She does not yet imagine herself ruling. She does not yet dream of councils or decrees. But the seed of possibility is already planted, watered by circumstance, waiting in the dark soil of time. In the still hours of the night, she sometimes walks the courtyards alone, escorted only by the glow of lanterns and the muted steps of attendants. The air is cool against her skin, the moonlight silvering the golden roofs. She looks toward the hall of supreme harmony, vast and imposing, and wonders what future lies hidden in its shadows. She knows that her son's life is tethered to it, and thus her own. Motherhood softens her, but it also steels her. She grows protective, aware that within the palace, jealousy can poison faster than any blade. She shields her son with vigilance, entrusting him only to the most loyal hands. Even as courtiers and concubines maneuver around her, she learns to guard her heart behind calm eyes. She speaks little, but in silence she listens. And in listening, she learns. Years pass with the boy growing at her side and the emperor's health waning. His reign, though begun with youthful promise, is consumed by crisis. By the late 1850s, the empire bends under pressures too vast for one man to bear. In the palace, the emperor retreats often to his retreats at the summer palace, seeking solace in gardens and lakes. Lady Yi follows when summoned, her son always near her, the fragile hope of continuity kept close. The emperor's court grows anxious, knowing that without a strong successor, the empire may fracture. Ministers bow with heavier sighs, edicts are written with slower hands, and everywhere an undercurrent of unease hums like a low drum beat. Yet amid this unease, Lady Yi feels her own position harden into certainty. Whatever storms may come, her child is the heir. Through him, she is anchored to the throne. It is a precarious privilege. The emperor, cautious of leaving too much influence in any one woman's hands, ensures that the Empress consort Su-en remains the official mother of the heir in matters of ceremony. Yet the bond between Lady Yi and her son is undeniable, and in private chambers, no decree can sever it. She remains his true mother, his comfort, his guide. And so, within this shifting balance, she learns the first lessons of rule, patience, restraint, and the understanding that power does not need to be displayed to be real. In holding her son, she holds the empire's future. That knowledge alone changes her gaze, deepens her stillness, sharpens her resolve. The years close in, and the emperor's health declines further. His nights are restless, his breath grows thin. Lady Yi watches with a mixture of compassion and calculation. She knows what the future must hold. The dragon throne, heavy as it is, will soon rest upon the shoulders of a child. And in that moment, the empire will turn to those who stand closest to him. For now, the palace continues in its rituals, each day echoing centuries of repetition. But beneath the rituals, the ground shifts. A lotus has bloomed, not merely in the waters of the forbidden city, but at its very heart. And around it, currents begin to swirl. In her son's breath, Lady Yi hears the pulse of an empire. In his small hands, she feels the weight of centuries. Soon, the emperor's life will ebb away, leaving a throne too vast for a child, and a curtain behind which two women will rule. The air within the forbidden city is heavy with incense and grief. The year is 1861, and the Shanfeng emperor, frail from illness and worn by the strain of rebellion and defeat, breathes his last in the distant summer palace. He leaves behind no seasoned heir, no strong successor. Instead, he leaves the throne to a boy of 5 years old. Zaishan, the son of Lady Yi. The dragon throne, carved from sandalwood and layered with centuries of expectation, now stands too vast for such small shoulders. The empire, restless with rebellion, foreign encroachment, and the weight of its own traditions, looks upon the child with uncertainty. And so, as has happened in dynasties before, the true burden falls not upon the boy himself, but upon those who stand at his side. Lady Yi, now elevated as the Empress Dowager Cixi, the other is Empress Dowager Su-en, widow of the Xianfeng emperor. whose rank gives her senior authority in the eyes of tradition. Two women, one the emperor's wife, the other the emperor's concubine, must now hold together an empire in peril. It is an arrangement forged from necessity. The Shanfeng emperor, in his final days, entrusted the guardianship of his son to 8 regents, men of his court whom he believed would safeguard the dynasty. Yet power does not always rest where it is assigned. Those regents, bound by ambition and burdened with their own agendas, soon clash with the will of the empresses. Conflict brews, as it so often does in palaces where shadows hold as much weight as decrees. In this tense moment, Cixi shows the first flicker of the steel that will define her life. Though still young, though still cloaked in the modesty expected of a woman in her position, she refuses to be sidelined. Her intelligence, her keen memory, and her ability to read both silences and words give her a subtle advantage. With cautious steps, she begins to maneuver, building alliances where others see only barriers. The opportunity arrives in the form of what history will call the Xinyu coup. With the support of Prince Gong, the emperor's brother, and with the quiet yet resolute strength of her co-regent Su En, Cixi overturns the authority of the regents. The men who believed themselves the true guardians of power are cast aside. Authority is gathered instead into the hands of the 2 Empress Dowagers. And thus begins a new chapter in China's imperial story, one not written by generals or ministers, but by 2 women who govern from behind a silk screen. The image is unforgettable. In court audiences, the young boy, enthroned as the Tongji emperor, sits in view of ministers and officials. But behind him, separated by a thin screen of embroidered silk, sit his 2 mothers, Su En and Cixi. Their voices emerge, soft yet firm, issuing decisions through the child who is too young to comprehend them. They are not seen, but they are present. They do not stand before the throne, but they shape its every decree. This is the practice known as listening from behind the curtain. It is both an innovation and a continuation, for women in dynastic China have occasionally ruled as regents, though always with careful veiling of their presence. To appear too openly would be to court accusations of impropriety. To remain too hidden would be to surrender influence. And so the curtain becomes their shield, a symbol of their invisibility, but also of their undeniable power. For Cixi, this moment is both triumph and burden. She has moved from concubine to Empress Dowager, from mother to regent. The stakes of every choice she makes are amplified by the fragility of the throne and the turbulence of the empire. She treads carefully, always aware of the thinness of her position, always aware that whispers in the court can swell into storms. Yet in her restraint there is strength. She learns to speak sparingly in audiences, letting silence itself become her instrument. When she does speak, her clarity and decisiveness cut through hesitation. Ministers, uncertain of how to address a woman in such authority, soon learn that her knowledge of detail surpasses many of their own. She remembers names, she recalls edicts, she questions accounts. Nothing escapes her attention. Beside her, Empress Dowager Su En plays a complementary role. She is gentler, more reserved, less inclined to assert herself. The balance between them becomes a kind of harmony, with Su En embodying the quiet dignity of tradition and Cixi embodying the sharp pragmatism required for survival. Together, they form a dyad, 2 women, veiled yet unyielding, shaping the fate of a dynasty in twilight. But beyond the silk curtain, the empire seethes. The Taiping rebellion, though weakened, still threatens stability. Local governors rise as warlords in all but name, gathering armies loyal more to themselves than to the throne. Western powers, having forced their way into China through the Opium Wars, demand ever more concessions, their flags and merchants now permanent fixtures in treaty ports. To govern is to constantly respond, never to rest. Cixi feels the empire as a body in fever, restless, exhausted, gasping for renewal yet clinging to old forms. She senses, perhaps dimly at first, that the old ways of rule cannot hold forever. But she also knows that change, too quickly embraced, could unravel what little remains of stability. Her instinct is to preserve, to protect, to guard against the rushing tides by strengthening the walls around her son's throne. The young Tongqi emperor grows in this atmosphere of care and caution. He plays with toys while decrees are signed in his name. He runs through courtyards while rebellions are crushed in distant provinces. His childhood is gilded yet burdened, for even as he laughs, the eyes of the empire rest upon him. And behind him, always behind him, are the women who ensure that his laughter continues. For Cixi, motherhood is no longer only personal. It is political, symbolic, eternal. To raise her son is to raise the dynasty itself. She becomes vigilant, sometimes severe, shaping him not merely as a child, but as an emperor in miniature. Yet the tenderness of a mother remains. She watches over his sleep, she guides his small hand. When he learns to write, she shields him as much as possible from the crushing weight of expectation. In these years, she discovers within herself the paradox of rule, the need to love and the need to harden. To love the child, but to harden herself against those who might harm him. To love the empire, but to harden herself against its impossible demands. History lingers on the image of the silk curtain, delicate yet strong. It is the veil through which power passes, the threshold between seen and unseen, between child and empire, between tradition and survival. It is, in many ways, the perfect metaphor for Cixi herself, a woman never meant to be visible, yet impossible to ignore. As the years stretch forward, the boy grows older, and the challenges of empire only deepen. But for now, the curtain holds, the balance endures, and the dynasty survives. Two women sit in shadow, their presence unacknowledged yet essential, guiding an empire through one of its most fragile passages. Behind the silk curtain, two women breathe life into a throne too heavy for a child. But outside the walls, the empire trembles, and Cixi will soon feel the true weight of survival pressing upon her hand. The forbidden city breathes uneasily. Its courtyards, once echoing with the rituals of an adult sovereign, now bend around the presence of a boy, an emperor still in the tender season of childhood. The dragon throne stands taller than him, its carved coils of gold and lacquer a burden too vast for his slight frame. He cannot yet wield the scepter, yet it is his name that seals every edict, his face that is painted in ancestral lines upon silk scrolls. But in truth, the empire leans not on his shoulders, but on the silken presence of women hidden behind carved screens. Cixi and the senior empress consort sit in the shadows, their voices transmitted through courtiers, their decisions spoken as if from a distance. It is the rule from behind the curtain, a strange theatre where power is both veiled and undeniable. Outside the palace walls, the empire itself trembles. Vast provinces groan under the weight of famine and corruption. Soldiers mutter in their garrisons, their pay delayed. In the villages, peasants rise up, desperate, their hunger giving birth to rebellion. To the north, the Mongols stir. To the south, secret societies whisper of change. China, that great and ancient land, is restless, as though the very soil senses the fragility of the boy emperor's reign. And yet, within the forbidden city, there is a strange stillness. The air is heavy with protocol. Ministers bow lower, their voices softer, as if the thinness of the emperor's age must be compensated by layers of deference. Every ceremony continues, every incense stick burns, every ritual of ancestor worship repeats with unwavering devotion. Outwardly, the empire honors its child ruler. Inwardly, it tests the strength of those who guide him. Cixi learns quickly. She watches how the elder empress speaks, never too directly, always in suggestion, her words like drops of water shaping stone. She observes the ministers, each with his own ambition cloaked in robes of loyalty. And she senses, too, that behind every bow, there is a calculation. In such a world, survival is not granted, it is won, quietly, every day. She remembers her own path into the palace, how she was once a concubine among many. Now she is the mother of the Son of Heaven, a role at once exalted and perilous. For in the forbidden city, a woman's influence is both weapon and wound. Too much visibility and suspicion rises. Too much silence and her relevance fades. She learns to balance like a dancer on a thread. One step too far, and all collapses. The dragon throne itself becomes her teacher. Its presence fills the palace, a symbol that outlasts those who sit upon it. She knows that it is not merely a chair of gold. It is weight. Weight of heaven, weight of history, weight of expectation. A boy may sit upon it, but behind him stand the shadows of dynasties, the ghosts of emperors past, the unyielding eyes of ancestors. And now, in this fragile reign, the throne demands steady hands unseen. In the provinces, rebellion flames brighter. The Taiping, their leader claiming visions of heaven, rise with ferocity. They declare a kingdom of their own, promising justice, equality, salvation. Villagers rally to them, believing a new dawn has come. Their banners spread across southern China like fire across dry fields. The Qing Dynasty faces perhaps its most dangerous challenge in centuries. News drifts into the forbidden city like a bitter wind. Reports of battles lost, cities surrendered, tax revenues cut off. Ministers argue in hushed voices. Some call for decisive action, others hesitate, unwilling to commit their armies without assurance of reward. The young emperor plays with carved jade toys, unaware that his empire teeters. And behind the curtain, Cixi listens. She does not yet command armies. She cannot yet stamp her will openly on the empire. But she learns to measure silence against speech. She learns to ask the questions no one else asks, to suggest alliances, to approve appointments with careful deliberation. Her power grows not as flame, but as ember, glowing steadily, waiting for the moment to burn brighter. At night, when the palace grows quiet, she walks through the courtyards beneath the lantern light. She looks upon the roofs gilded by moonlight and wonders how long such splendor can endure. She knows history well, the fall of dynasties, the rebellions that toppled emperors, the fragility of rule when the mandate of heaven is doubted. She feels the weight of the dragon throne not only for her son but for herself, for if he falls, so too does she. And yet, within her there is resilience. She does not weep as other women might. She does not fear as the ministers whisper fearfully in their chambers. Instead, she watches, she listens, she waits. Power, she understands, is not seized in haste. It is gathered like water in a vessel, drop by drop, until it fills. The boy emperor grows, but slowly. His childhood is filled with tutors, lessons in calligraphy, recitations of the classics, but his heart is that of a child still, innocent, playful, unready for the burdens placed upon him. Cixi becomes not only his mother but his shield. Every decision made in his name passes through her. Every danger aimed at him glances first toward her. And though she is not yet openly sovereign, her presence becomes inseparable from his reign. The empire beyond the palace does not see her face, yet it feels her influence. An appointment delayed, a punishment softened, an alliance suggested, these small acts ripple outward. Though unseen, her hand steadies the throne. Still, the weight is immense. The dragon throne is not forgiving. It demands sacrifices of sleep, of peace, of certainty. It forces her to reckon with ambition and humility, with loyalty and betrayal. At times she wonders if she is carrying it, or if it is carrying her, binding her life to its vast and unyielding destiny. But she endures, and in enduring she transforms. The girl who once walked timidly into the forbidden city now stands, quietly but firmly, as the guardian of an emperor too young to rule. She becomes, in these early years, what she will always remain: the woman who learns that power, like the throne itself, is both a burden and a crown. The dragon throne gleams in the lantern light, towering above the boy who sits upon it, and yet it is her shadow that steadies its weight. The throne teaches her patience, the empire tests her resolve, and already her hand moves in silence where others fear to tread. Soon, the curtain will lift once more, and the world will glimpse how a mother becomes a sovereign. The forbidden city is still in the early light, its red walls glowing as if lit from within, its tiled roofs catching the pale shimmer of morning. Yet beyond its gates, China is stirring with storms that cannot be stilled. The air is heavy with incense and tradition here, but far away, along the coasts and rivers, another smoke curls into the sky, opium smoke, a haze that softens men's minds, even as it sharpens the knives of empire. Cixi, still young but already a mother and regent, feels the weight of these shadows pressing closer. She listens as ministers bring word of foreign ships, black-hulled and iron-ribbed, bristling with cannons, that sit like predators at the empire's harbours. The stories are strange, unsettling, almost unbelievable: men with pale faces and strange tongues, guns that roar like thunder, treaties written not in dialogue but in surrender. The Middle Kingdom, eternal and unyielding in its own eyes, is being forced to kneel before powers that only yesterday seemed like distant wanderers. The opium wars scar the land. Fields once green with rice and wheat give way to addiction. Fathers sell heirlooms for powder, sons waste their strength in smoke. A single flower, the poppy, blooms into ruin across the empire. And behind it all, the Western powers smile, their ships sailing deeper into Chinese waters, their hands reaching further into Chinese soil. For centuries, the forbidden city has been a universe unto itself, its silence broken only by the shuffle of slippers on stone, the flutter of robes, the soft whisper of court ritual. Now, however, that silence trembles under the echo of cannon fire from the coast. Even the thick walls of Beijing cannot keep out the sound of a world unraveling. Cixi watches with sharp, unreadable eyes. She knows she did not choose this confrontation, yet she must carry its burden. Ministers debate endlessly, Some argue for resistance, others for appeasement. Pride wars with pragmatism. The empire that once sent its tribute system outward like spokes from a wheel now finds itself the supplicant. It is a reversal almost too vast to comprehend, like the sun rising in the west. Foreign envoys begin to arrive, their carriages rolling through the very gates of the forbidden city, their boots striking against stones, polished by centuries of Chinese emperors' processions. To receive them is humiliation, to deny them is danger. Cixi observes the tension as protocol bends and ancient rituals are disrupted. The Son of Heaven is expected to bow to no one. Yet here stand men who demand his court's compliance at the edge of their bayonets. She notes the way the court stiffens, how officials turn their eyes away from the intruders. Yet she does not look away. She studies them, these men from across the seas, with their heavy coats and steely glances, their hands used to holding weapons instead of brushes. She understands, even if silently, that something irreversible is taking place. The empire of harmony, rooted in rites and traditions, now meets a world that measures power in factories and fleets. In the council chambers, scrolls unfurl like wounded banners, treaties signed after defeat, concessions carved into the map. Hong Kong ceded, ports opened, foreign laws imposed on Chinese soil, words written in ink, yet each stroke as heavy as iron chains, and through all of this, the opium continues to flow. Its smoke coils into villages, into barracks, into the veins of officials themselves. It is not just a weapon of war, but of erosion, a slow unmaking of the empire from within. She despises it, though she must live among those weakened by its hold. She knows that no dynasty can stand if its own people are dissolving into shadows. The palace rituals continue, the drumbeats at dawn, the offerings of incense, the endless petitions brought before her eyes. Yet beneath them runs a new undercurrent. China is no longer the unchallenged heart of the world. It is being reshaped, pressed upon by tides it did not summon. She feels the weight of a paradox. To guard tradition is to resist change, yet to resist change is to invite defeat. She retreats at times to the inner gardens, where pines bend over rockeries and lotus ponds lie still. There, among the rustle of bamboo and the ripple of carp in water, she contemplates the path ahead. She is a woman bound by court and custom, yet she is also a mother, a regent, a survivor. Her thoughts run deeper than the still surface of the ponds. She wonders, can silk truly withstand steel? Can an empire that measures time in dynasties withstand the urgency of machines that count in seconds? The answer does not come. Instead, she must balance, to allow enough concession to survive, yet not so much that the throne is stripped bare. It is a delicate dance, one she performs behind the silken curtain, her presence unseen but her influence felt in every decision, every hesitation. Outside the walls, the empire burns and rebuilds in uneven rhythm. Rebellions flare, sparked by anger at foreign intrusion, fueled by despair at imperial weakness. Villages rise, fists clenched against the intruder, only to be crushed by armies stronger than any they have known. The land itself seems restless, its rivers carrying not only silt and life but also sorrow and anger. Yet within the forbidden city, the air is still perfumed with sandalwood, the courtyards swept clean, the rituals performed with precision. The contrast is striking, an empire fractured, yet its ceremonial heart beating as though unchanged. She knows the danger of such illusions. She has seen how quickly security can dissolve. She remembers the emperor's death, the sudden shift of power, the precariousness of all that appears eternal. Now, as opium smoke drifts unseen into every layer of society, she sees again that fragility. She sharpens her gaze. She learns to listen not just to the words of courtiers, but to the silences between them, the tremors in their voices, the betrayals hidden in their hesitation. She learns that power, like jade, must be polished daily, or it dulls. Western shadows lengthen across the empire, yet she does not yield. If silk cannot hide cannon fire, it can still conceal intention. She waits, she observes, she bends where bending preserves survival. Some will call her cautious, others cunning. Perhaps both are true, but she knows that to endure is itself a victory in times of fracture. The forbidden city remains, its golden roofs gleaming at sunset, but now foreign flags flutter on the coast, and foreign merchants walk streets once closed to them. The world is no longer at China's borders, it has entered China's very veins. Cixi breathes this truth deeply, though she seldom speaks it aloud. She holds it close, like a hidden blade. The empire she governs is changing, and she must change with it, or be consumed by the tide. And so, as opium smoke drifts over rivers and cannons echo from the harbours, Cixi begins to learn that survival is not always in strength, but in patience. The dragon throne endures, yet ever more heavily upon its bearer, and soon the weight of rule will press upon her like never before. The city is restless, the empire unsettled, yet beyond Beijing's crowded walls lies a world of stillness. It is here, at the foot of the western hills, that Cixi finds her retreat, the Summer Palace. Known once as the Garden of Clear Ripples, it is more than a place. It is a vision of how she wishes the world to be, measured, serene, under her careful gaze. The Summer Palace is a poem written in stone and water. Kunming Lake stretches wide and luminous, reflecting the drifting clouds. Bridges curve gracefully over its rippling surface. Painted corridors wander for hundreds of meters, their beams alive with scenes of myth and history. Willows bend low to kiss the water, their branches like green veils swaying in the breeze. Pavilions rise with red pillars and golden tiles, each one placed with intention, each one echoing the order of heaven mirrored on earth. For Cixi, it is not simply a place of leisure. It is an extension of herself, her taste, her desire for beauty, her command over space. When she walks its shaded paths, she is not the harried regent of a fracturing empire, nor the woman caught between reform and tradition. She is sovereign in a different way, the mistress of a garden that answers to her will. Here she holds audiences in painted halls, her voice carrying softly over polished floors, her robes trailing like brushstrokes across silk. Ministers come and go, but she remains, surrounded by lotus blossoms and carved dragons. The Summer Palace is both sanctuary and stage, a space where she can govern with calm while the capital trembles with unrest. And yet, the still waters conceal turbulence. The rebuilding of the Summer Palace is costly. After foreign armies burned and looted Beijing in earlier wars, its once proud halls lay in ruin. To restore it requires immense sums, funds that flow from the treasury at a time when the empire can least afford it. Roads remain unbuilt, arsenals outdated, soldiers unpaid, while marble balustrades and painted eaves rise anew. Critics whisper, the empire weakens while its ruler builds a dream of permanence in fragile stone. But Cixi does not see it as extravagance. To her, beauty is not indulgence but necessity. To create harmony in her surroundings is to affirm order in a world unraveling. In the sweep of a veranda, in the play of shadow and sunlight across carved lattice, she finds a reminder that not all is chaos. That refinement endures even as the cannons roar on distant shores. Kunming Lake itself tells this story. Dug centuries earlier by emperors before her, it is fed by channels from the hills, its waters reflecting the changing skies. For her, it is both mirror and refuge. On its surface, she sees the empire as she wishes it to be, calm, endless, untouchable by the storms beyond its shores. Yet beneath that stillness, the silt shifts unseen, just as the empire's foundations shift beneath her feet. At dawn, mist rises from the lake like incense smoke, blurring the outlines of bridges and islands. She watches it from her chambers, a cup of tea warming her hands, her thoughts as restless as the currents beneath the calm. At night, lanterns line the pathways, casting red reflections across the water, turning the garden into a floating world of shadow and flame. In those hours, when silence presses deep, she feels the paradox of her reign. Surrounded by beauty, yet pursued by ruin, the summer palace becomes a symbol in itself. Foreign envoys see its grandeur and call it vanity. Ministers see its cost and call it waste. But she sees what they cannot. That power is not only measured in armies and treaties, but in the shaping of space, the commanding of beauty. To walk through halls painted with legends, to see the Empress Dowager enthroned amid lotus ponds and marble balustrades. This too is authority. It tells the court and the world that she endures, that she governs not from fear alone, but from a vision of permanence. Still, whispers circle the lake like drifting leaves. Whispers of corruption, of misplaced priorities, of an empire drained to feed a dream. Whispers that the marble is colder than steel, that paintings cannot repel foreign fleets, and perhaps in quiet moments she hears them too, but she silences them with the rustle of silk and the sound of zithers played in the garden pavilions. There is irony too in the very stones. The summer palace was rebuilt with funds meant to strengthen the navy, to forge ships that might meet Western fleets with force. Instead, that silver poured into courtyards and corridors, into gardens that float still and beautiful but unmoving, when sailors later face ironclads with wooden vessels. When the empire bows again under foreign fire, critics will remember the marble balustrades of Kunming Lake and lay blame at her feet. Yet in this moment, she does not look to battlefields. She looks to water lilies and painted rafters, to the illusion of eternity crafted in timber and stone. The summer palace is her answer to fragility. If the empire falters, let beauty remain. If history shifts like sand, let marble endure as testament to her reign. There is a lesson in the corridors themselves. Each beam of the long corridor is painted with scenes. Landscapes, battles, immortals, flowers. Thousands of images, each brushstroke precise, each telling a fragment of China's vast memory. To walk its length is to walk through the stories of the nation itself. Perhaps she believes that by preserving this corridor, she preserves the continuity of the empire, even as the present threatens to unravel. The garden breathes with paradox. It is refuge and reproach, beauty and burden. To her, it is a sanctuary. To history, it will become a symbol of misplaced grandeur. Yet even knowing this, she walks its paths with quiet determination. For an empress, perhaps, it is better to be remembered for beauty than for defeat. The waters of Kunming Lake shimmer as a breeze drifts across its surface, Shadows of willows quiver. Somewhere unseen, a heron lifts into flight. Time slows in this place. And in that slowing, Cixi finds the rhythm she needs to endure. The world beyond the palace walls rushes toward change. But here, the pace is hers to command. And so, the summer palace becomes her mirror. It reflects both her strength and her flaw, her vision and her blindness. It is the still water in which she sees herself, sovereign, survivor, guardian of a fading dynasty. But even the clearest water holds shadows. Even the most beautiful garden cannot silence the approaching storm. Beneath the painted beams and rippling waters, beauty lingers, but uneasily, for grandeur alone cannot shield an empire in peril. Soon, the question will rise, can splendor be joined with strength? The summer palace glitters in sunlight, its painted beams fresh with stories of immortals and rivers. Yet beyond its serene waters, the world does not pause. Foreign gunboats linger along the coasts, factories roar in distant lands, and the empire trembles under defeats too sharp to ignore. A truth is rising like the tide. China can no longer stand unchanged. Out of this recognition, the self-strengthening movement begins. It is not born in triumph but in necessity, a reluctant child of humiliation and survival. Defeated in wars, humbled by treaties, shaken by rebellion, the Qing court must answer a question that echoes through its chambers. How does an ancient empire adapt without losing itself? New ministers step forward. Men who have seen the power of the West, who have read foreign books, who understand that canon and compass shape the world as much as ritual and decree. Among them stand names that history will remember: Zhang Gofan, Lai Hongchang, Zhuo Zongtang. They bring with them not only loyalty to the dynasty, but visions of railways crossing valleys, arsenals hammering steel, schools teaching beyond the four books. See, she listens. She is cautious, but she listens. Her throne is built on tradition, yet her gaze is not blind to change. She knows the weight of the empire's defeats, the sting of concessions, the murmurs of unrest that ripple through provinces. She allows the ministers to speak of factories and fleets, though their words are foreign in tone and unsettling in implication. The self-strengthening movement grows like lanterns lit one by one in a storm. Arsenals rise along rivers, their furnaces glowing as sparks leap into twilight. Ironclad ships are built, steam engines hiss. Telegraph wires stretch like silver threads across the land. Young men are sent abroad to learn the sciences of the West, to bring home knowledge as if carrying embers from a distant fire. In these moments, hope stirs. It is fragile, but it flickers. The thought that perhaps China may yet catch the wind of modernity without losing the anchor of tradition. The ministers imagine a nation that can defend itself, that can weave the strength of industry into the fabric of its ancient civilization. But hope never stands alone. Alongside it walks hesitation. At every proposal, courtiers whisper, will this erode the Confucian order? Will new schools undermine the classics? Will factories disturb the balance of heaven and earth? Each step forward is checked by a glance backward, each spark threatened by the water of caution. See, she stands at the center of this tension. She allows enough reform to keep the dynasty breathing, but never so much that it risks shaking the throne. For her, survival is not measured in the pace of railways, but in the endurance of power. She watches carefully, ensuring that every new arsenal, every foreign-styled academy remains tethered to her will. Her balance is deliberate, even artful. When arsenals are built, They are commanded by men of loyal families. When young scholars go abroad, their number is small, their paths tightly guided. She allows progress, but she holds its leash, never letting it run free. For in her eyes, reform without control is not renewal. It is a storm that could sweep away the dynasty itself. The empire leaves in paradox. In Shanghai, smokestacks rise above warehouses where once only junks floated. Telegraph lines hum with messages faster than any courier could ride. Foreign trained engineers build machines that turn night into day with sparks of electricity. Yet in Beijing, rituals unfold as they have for centuries. Officials kneel in their appointed robes. Incense curls upward to heaven. The classics are recited as timeless truths. China breathes with two lungs, one ancient, one modern, yet they do not breathe in rhythm. The self-strengthening movement is noble in intention, but uneven in result. Factories rise, but their management falters. Fleets are built, but funds are siphoned away. Telegraphs hum, but suspicion lingers, and many fear the wires as alien intrusions. Reform flickers like lanterns, but storms snuff them out as often as they glow. Still, she sees the necessity. She knows that beauty alone cannot shield the dynasty. She has seen the flames of foreign guns, felt the sting of their terms, heard the trembling in her ministers' voices. She does not embrace change with open arms, but she accepts it as one accepts a bitter medicine, swallowed slowly, measured carefully, taken not for desire but for survival. The ministers who lead the movement struggle under the burden of compromise. They are men caught between two worlds, admired and mistrusted in equal measure. Zhang Gofan builds arsenals but keeps Confucian rituals. Li Hongchang negotiates with foreigners yet remains loyal to the throne. They are both praised as visionaries and accused of betraying tradition. Their lives are lived like bridges, walked upon by many, trusted by few, stretched between shores that do not meet. For the people, the changes bring wonder and confusion. In villages, stories spread of machines that move without oxen, of ships that sail against the wind, of messages sent faster than thought itself. Some marvel, others fear. Some dream of strength, others mutter of omens. In teahouses and market stalls, the empire's fate is debated in hushed voices, as if the future itself were a guest listening from a nearby table. Through it all, she holds the curtain. She allows just enough light through, but never the full blaze. She nurtures sparks, but keeps them from becoming flames she cannot control. She is guardian and gatekeeper, protector and limiter. Her rule is not one of bold leaps, but of careful steps, her hand steady on the scale between tradition and transformation. Yet history does not always reward caution. While the West surges forward with industrial revolutions, while Japan modernizes swiftly after its Meiji restoration, China lags, caught in the slow rhythm of hesitation. By the time reforms take shape, the world has already leapt ahead. The self-strengthening movement builds ships, but they rust in harbors. It founds schools, but too few to change the nation's course. Its lanterns glow, but they cannot banish the storm. And so the paradox deepens. She has preserved the throne, but the empire remains vulnerable. She has allowed progress, but guarded against transformation. She has lit candles in the darkness, but withheld the fire that might have burned brighter. In this balance lies her legacy, cautious, enduring, but forever shadowed by what might have been. As night settles over the summer palace, lanterns glow along the long corridor. Their light flickers on painted beams, on water rippling beneath the moon. Cixi walks slowly, her thoughts heavy with the weight of both progress and peril. She hears the whispers of ministers urging reform, the echoes of scholars quoting the classics, the distant hum of telegraphs carrying messages through the dark, all converge upon her. The past, the present, the uncertain future. In the stillness, she pauses, her gaze turning toward Qing Lake. Its surface reflects the lanterns like stars, fragile lights trembling in a vast darkness. The self-strengthening movement is like those reflections, bright, beautiful, yet uncertain, easily scattered by the wind. She wonders if they will endure, or if they will fade, leaving only shadows on the water. The lanterns flicker, their glow fragile against the encroaching storm. Progress is kindled, but doubt lingers, and soon the empire will carve a symbol of its paradox into stone itself, the marble boat, unmoving on waters meant to flow. On the quiet waters of Qing Lake, a vessel rests that has never known the weight of waves. Its hull is carved from solid stone, its decks decorated with delicate balustrades, its pavilion painted with the colors of clouds and dawn. It is called the marble boat, though it cannot sail, though it cannot drift, though its purpose lies not in motion, but in symbol. Here, Cixi comes to stand in contemplation. She gazes across the waters that ripple softly beneath the sky, waters that whisper of time's ceaseless passage, while the boat itself remains frozen in place. This contrast, stillness set upon movement, mirrors the paradox of her rule. Around her, the empire strains, buffeted by tides of change, yet here, in stone, is her declaration. Grandeur without yielding, beauty without transformation. The marble boat is not ancient. It was built in her time, with her will and her treasury, yet its inspiration is older. Echoes of vessels from the Ming, when emperors raised floating pavilions as places of retreat and vision. For Cixi, who commands a dynasty threatened by storms, the boat becomes something more than ornament. It is an assertion, perhaps even a defiance, that even as waves strike, she will not let her dynasty drift into the unknown. But the paradox is sharp. To create this symbol of permanence, she diverts funds meant for ships of wood and iron. The empire needs a navy, yet receives a marble dream. The very water beneath the boat will one day carry foreign fleets that prove unstoppable. The stone vessel remains intact, but China's wooden ships, neglected, are shattered by cannon fire. Still, in this moment, the air of the summer palace cloaks, all in tranquility. Cixi walks the winding paths, shaded by willows that lean over the water. She orders renovations, repairs, expansions, all to make this refuge a world unto itself. The marble boat gleams among these efforts, reflecting in the lake like a vision of stability, an illusion of permanence amid fragility. Visitors and ministers watch her here. They see her fascination with symbols, with the careful weaving of meaning into architecture and art. She believes that beauty, order, and ritual can anchor a people when the outer world spins into chaos. The marble boat, like the dragon throne itself, is theatre as much as power, a stage upon which the empress can embody continuity even as history frays at the edges. The courtiers whisper, though not within her hearing. They mutter of extravagance, of misused funds, of a ruler more concerned with appearances than necessities. Yet even their whispers acknowledge the power of her vision. For who can look upon the marble boat and not sense the weight of allegory? A dynasty held still, unwilling to be carried forward by the currents of the age. In the evenings, when lanterns are lit, the boat glows like a phantom vessel. Its windows shine, and the lake gathers the light into trembling reflections. Music drifts across the water, strings and flutes, slow melodies that echo against the hills. Cixi sits within, listening, her silhouette framed by painted screens. For a few hours, she allows herself the comfort of believing that time itself can be stayed, that the empire can endure as stone endures, if only she wills it so. But outside these waters, the empire is restless. Beyond the carved railings and still decks, the clamour of factories rises in foreign lands, the smoke of industry staining skies. Trains carve through continents, ironclads circle oceans. Reformers within her court plead for change, for ships and arsenals, for schools that teach modern sciences. She gives them some, but never all. She permits progress like a cautious gardener watering only certain plants, never allowing the whole garden to grow wild. And so the marble boat, unmoving, becomes the emblem of her choice. Partial, cautious, deliberate stillness amid urgent motion. Foreigners see it differently. When envoys and travellers describe the marble boat in their writings, they note its irony, sometimes with scorn. To them, it becomes a symbol of futility, a navy in stone, a ship that cannot sail. They see in it the decline of a great empire, unable to move with the current of modern history. They do not see what she sees. The need for permanence, the weight of tradition, the fragility that requires ritual strength. Yet history listens not to symbols, but to forces. When the empire later faces the humiliations of defeat, when fleets from abroad thunder at its coasts, the marble boat will remain untouched, serene, silent. The lake will ripple, the willows will bend, the palace will endure. But the dynasty itself will waver. The boat, like a frozen moment, becomes a monument to the choice of stillness in a world of storms. And yet, it is unfair to see it only as folly. There is poetry in its existence, a reminder that even rulers are dreamers, even power is tempered by longing for beauty. Cixi, burdened by intrigue, suspicion, and betrayal, sought in stone what she could not find in me. Loyalty, stability, permanence. The marble boat does not betray her. It does not question, does not revolt, does not crumble beneath pressure. It remains, as she wished, a silent partner to her reign. Today, long after her footsteps have faded, the marble boat still rests upon Qing Lake. Tourists walk its decks, marveling at its strangeness. Some smile at its futility, some sigh at its beauty. Few remember the weight of meaning it carried for the woman who ordered it. Yet the stone still whispers of her desire to anchor an empire in the midst of waves, of her struggle to reconcile movement and stillness. History often leaves us with such paradoxes. Monuments that speak both of strength and of weakness. Choices that illuminate and obscure. The marble boat is not only Cixi's creation, it is her metaphor. It embodies the dynasty itself at that moment in time, richly adorned, profoundly still, unable or unwilling to move with the waters that carried the world into a new age. And so it waits, as stone always waits. The ripples of Qing Lake continue to pass beneath it, unending, unbroken. Time moves on. Dynasties rise and fall. Yet the marble boat remains, a reminder that sometimes the greatest beauty is also the greatest tragedy. Permanence where there should have been motion, the marble boat lingers as both monument and warning. A dynasty frozen upon restless waters, and beyond its stillness, the world begins to stir with louder cries for change. The halls of the Forbidden City are quiet tonight. The lockered gates, the vermilion walls, the endless stone courtyards seem to hold their breath. For within, an empress mother bends over the weight of grief too vast for ceremony. The boy who once filled these chambers with laughter, her only son, lies still. The dynasty has lost its emperor, she has lost her child, Tongqi, her son. The boy emperor who was meant to carry the dynasty forward had been the light of her watchful eyes, the fragile promise for which she endured so many struggles. He was not strong in body, but he was hers, and in him she had glimpsed continuity. Now the halls echo only with absence. His reign, brief and troubled, collapses like an unfinished scroll. The death of a child is always a fracture in the world. For Cixi, it is more than a mother's grief. It is the unravelling of a future she had woven thread by thread, the silken promise of stability torn by hands unseen. She sits by the curtained windows of the palace, incense smoke trailing upward in thin, uncertain streams. Her eyes do not weep easily. Tears, in her world, are not private but political. Still, the silence around her is heavy with sorrow. But empires do not wait for mourning. The dragon throne cannot remain empty. Ministers whisper, clans jostle, the court ripples with the urgency of succession. The dynasty teeters, and she must decide. The law is clear yet not unyielding. A new emperor must be chosen from among the imperial clan. The throne cannot fall into foreign hands, nor into those too distant from the bloodline. And so her gaze turns toward her sister's son, a boy named Zaichan. Barely a child, innocent of intrigue, fragile in years, but close enough in lineage. He will be lifted into the storm, and she will steady the hand that holds the scepter. When she makes her choice, it is both practical and personal. Zaichan is not merely a nephew's. He is a continuation of her own thread, bound by family and affection. By naming him emperor, she binds her grief to new resolve. Her son is gone, but she will not let the dynasty dissolve into chaos. The court gathers for the proclamation. The vast golden roofs shimmer, the ancestral spirits invoked, the ritual words spoken. Zaichan ascends as the Guangxu emperor, a child too small for the dragon robes that brush the marble steps. His wide eyes search for guidance, and he finds it in her. Once more, Cixi steps behind the curtain, the unseen hand that steadies the empire. It is a strange symmetry. Twice now she has entered the role of regent. Twice she has watched small hands lifted onto a throne too large for them. The first time, with her own son, she was cautious, still learning how to balance the silences of power. Now she returns seasoned, her grief hardening into steel. She knows the shape of the court's resistance, the weight of the minister's doubt. She knows how easily the empire can fracture. Behind closed doors, she sharpens her resolve. Ministers come and go, their faces tense, their petitions long. She listens, nods, decides with measured tone. Her presence is both feared and necessary. Without her, the throne would fall into disarray. With her, it still clings to balance, and yet, in the quiet hours, grief lingers. In the gardens of the palace, she sometimes hears echoes of her son's voice. Laughter, carried in memory across painted bridges, footsteps that never return. She does not speak of it. To the world, she is iron. To herself, she is a mother who must transmute sorrow into endurance. The empire outside the Forbidden City continues to strain. The countryside is restless. Reformers murmur of change. Foreign powers still press at China's gates. Every trimmer in the outer provinces finds its way back to the palace, carried on the anxious reports of officials. The new boy emperor cannot yet understand the gravity of these burdens. But she can, and so she takes them upon her shoulders once more. In the ceremonial halls, Guangxu is instructed in the ancient rites. He bows before the tablets of his ancestors, recites words older than memory, wears robes stitched with dragons that once seemed too heavy for her own son. He is obedient, serious for his years, but the innocence of childhood remains in his eyes. She watches, her gaze unreadable, measuring not just the boy, but the man he may become. She knows how fragile the thread of survival is. To the ministers, she projects certainty. She insists upon continuity, upon the mandate of heaven unbroken. The dynasty, she tells them, has endured storms before. It will endure again. But privately, she knows the truth. Each loss chips away at the empire's strength. Her son's death is not only personal, but symbolic, a sign that time itself is eroding the foundations of the Qing. And yet she endures. It is her defining trait, the marrow of her power. She weathers grief as she weathers rebellion and war, with an unyielding face, with choices that secure today even if they jeopardize tomorrow. Her resilience is both her strength and her flaw, a refusal to yield even when the tide rises against her. The boy emperor grows under her watch, his education shaped by Confucian tutors, his world circumscribed by protocol and ritual. But always, her presence looms, the guiding shadow, the voice that decides when silence is not enough. He is emperor in name, but she is the axis upon which the empire turns. In time, whispers will grow around Guangxu, whispers of reform, of new visions for China. But for now, he is still a child, and she is still the guardian who has turned mourning into governance. Her sorrow does not disappear, but it crystallizes into determination. In the painted chambers of the Forbidden City, one truth endures: the dynasty survives because she wills it to survive. Each loss deepens her resolve. Each fracture in her heart hardens into resolve. The woman once chosen as a concubine, once dismissed as background to the emperor's world, has now become the center upon which the empire's fragile balance depends. The marble balustrades gleam under moonlight, the courtyards stretch in silence, and the empire holds its breath. A boy sits upon the throne, and a woman behind the curtain holds the strings of his reign. The son is gone, the nephew rises, and the story of China turns another page. Grief has reshaped her will, and once more she stands behind the curtain, guiding fragile hands upon a heavy throne. Yet even as she secures the present, shadows of reform stir in the distance. Whispers that will soon swell into a storm, in the brief season remembered as the 100 Days of Reform. The halls of the Forbidden City are not always still. Sometimes whispers gather like winds before a storm. In the late years of the 19th century, such a wind stirs within its vermilion walls. The voices of reformers, young men aflame with urgency, carrying scrolls filled with ideas that could reshape the empire. The Guangxu emperor, no longer a boy but still fragile in his authority, listens. His eyes, sharp and restless, search for pathways that his aunt, the formidable Empress Dowager Cixi, has long resisted. He sees China's humiliation written across treaties and concessions, sees foreign factories belching smoke by the harbours, sees armies drilled with precision unknown to the Qing. He dreams of a nation remade. And for a brief moment, it seems as if that dream may take flight. They call it the 100 Days of Reform. Less than a season, a span shorter than the time it takes for leaves to turn and fall. Yet in those days the empire quivers with possibility. Guangxu throws his support behind thinkers and scholars who press for transformation. Kang Youwei, Liang Chikao, names that echo like the toll of new bells, bring visions of constitutional monarchy, modern schools, new industries, and railways that bind the empire in iron threads. The forbidden city becomes a hive of hurried footsteps and ink-stained petitions. Edicts are drafted in quick succession. Schools teaching Western sciences, military academies reorganized, government offices streamlined, examinations altered to prize new knowledge over ancient rote. The brushstrokes of these decrees are fast, urgent, as if to outrun the inertia of centuries. For Guangxu, it is liberation. At last, he is more than a boy beneath his aunt's shadow. He sees himself as a sovereign with vision, a ruler who may save his people from decline. In the still hours of night, as lanterns glow against carved wooden panels, he dreams of railways stretching across the heart of China, of arsenals that rival the West, of a court that governs not by ritual alone but by efficiency. He dares to imagine an empire reborn. Yet every vision has its counterweight. Beyond the carved walls and silken corridors, Cixi watches. She has seen the empire weather storms before, seen it bend beneath the weight of foreign pressure and rebellion. But she has also seen what haste can do, how too much change, too quickly imposed, can unravel the delicate web of loyalty and tradition. To her, reform is not salvation but danger, a reckless gamble that could sweep away both throne and dynasty. Ministers loyal to her whisper of Guangxu's naivety, of scholars too intoxicated with foreign ways. They remind her that the strength of the Qing lies in its Confucian roots, its rituals, its slow endurance. And beneath their words is a quieter fear. That reform is not merely about railways or schools, but about power. Power slipping from her grasp into the hands of men who would sideline her, perhaps even remove her from the palace she has ruled for decades. The court becomes divided, its corridors filled with tension. On one side, Guangxu and his reformers moving quickly, drafting decree after decree. On the other, Cixi and her allies, steady, watchful, unconvinced that the ancient vessel of the empire can bear such sudden winds. For the people beyond Beijing, the reforms are more dream than reality. A new school here, a decree pinned there, little has yet touched the soil of their daily lives. But rumours spread, and rumours themselves of power. Some hear hope, others hear betrayal. The Guangxu emperor, emboldened, grows impatient. He begins to consider removing those who resist him, replacing entrenched officials with men of his own choosing. His reformers whisper encouragement, act now while the momentum is strong. They dream not just of reform, but of transformation, a leap from antiquity into modernity in the span of a single season. But dreams do not always take root in the soil of power. One evening, as the summer air presses heavy against the city, word reaches Cixi that the emperor intends to assert himself fully, to remove her influence, perhaps even to confine her. Whether rumor or truth, the warning strikes deep. She knows what must be done. The curtain rises on a quiet, ruthless act. Soldiers loyal to her move swiftly, surrounding the palace where Guangxu resides. Ministers aligned with the reformers are arrested, their petitions torn, their voices silenced. Some are executed, others flee into exile, their ideas carried with them like seeds scattered by wind. The emperor himself is not deposed, but bound. Confined within his own palace, his decrees annulled, his authority clipped like the wings of a bird. The 100 days of reform end not with ceremony, but with silence. A season of hope is folded shut, its pages torn from the book of history. Guangxu, who once imagined himself a sovereign remaking his nation, finds himself a prisoner emperor, his throne intact, but his power dissolved. Cixi reemerges, unshaken, her authority restored. To her, it is not cruelty, but necessity. Better to halt dangerous reform than to watch the dynasty collapse. Better to endure foreign pressures and gradual adaptation than to risk tearing apart the fabric of the empire in one reckless burst. She presents herself not as tyrant but as guardian, the steady hand preserving China's survival. Yet beneath her measured calm lies a deeper truth. She has bound her nephew's reign, curbed not only his policies but his spirit. The empire has survived another storm, but at what cost? The forbidden city returns to its familiar rhythms. Ritual resumes, the courtiers bow as before, the dragon throne still gleams beneath candlelight. But something has changed. Hope has been stilled, reform frozen in its tracks. The young emperor, once filled with vision, now lingers in the shadows of confinement, his voice muted. And the reformers, scattered abroad, carry tales of what might have been. In the summer palace, where carved bridges arc over still waters, Cixi walks slowly. The gardens are tranquil, the air scented with lotus, the marble balustrades reflecting sunlight. To her, these symbols of endurance justify her choice. The empire remains hers to guide, its traditions unbroken, its throne secure. She does not see defeat in the reform's end. She sees preservation. But history holds memory differently. In later years, when China faces further humiliation, when revolutions stir and the dynasty nears collapse, many will look back to those 100 days with longing. They will ask what if change had been allowed to grow? What if the emperor's vision had not been bound? What if the dynasty had leapt forward instead of standing still? These are questions that linger like incense smoke in the air of history, faint, elusive, impossible to grasp fully. The answers are lost in the silence that followed the arrests, in the stillness of Guangxu's chambers, in the hush that settled over the palace once Cixi had spoken her unyielding word. The 100 days of reform stand as a fleeting memory, a brief flare of possibility extinguished by the hand of caution. The empire survives, but it carries within it the ache of what might have been. The 100 days fade into silence, and the boy-turned-man emperor leaves on as a shadow within his own court. Yet outside the palace walls, unrest smoulders in the villages, fists soon to rise in rebellion, a storm of fire that history will remember as the Boxer Uprising. The empire is restless. Far from the golden halls of Beijing, in the dusty villages of northern China, whispers stir the air. They rise from fields left dry by famine, from temples where incense smoulders low, from bodies bruised by poverty and humiliation. Foreign powers have entered the land, missionaries, merchants, soldiers, and with them come strange tongues, strange gods, and strange machines. To some they bring opportunity, to many they bring insult, intrusion, and fear. The people call themselves the Yi Hu Chuan, the righteous and harmonious fists. Outsiders will later call them the Boxers. In open fields, under clouded skies, young men train their bodies into weapons. They practice stances and strikes, blending martial art with ritual. They believe the spirits protect them. that bullets cannot pierce their skin, that the ancestors rise through them. Their fists are not only fists, they are prayers of desperation, clenched against a world they no longer recognize. At first, the rebellion flickers at the edges. A missionary attacked on a lonely road, a church burned in the night, foreign merchants driven out of villages where their goods are seen as poison. But soon the flame spreads. The countryside trembles with anger, and the Boxers' ranks swell. Farmers join, laborers join, even children carry the cries of resistance. Their chant rises into the air like a storm cloud. Support the Qing, destroy the foreign. Cixi watches this fire from afar. The forbidden city, sealed behind vermilion gates, is never truly silent. Reports stream in from the provinces, each one filled with stories of violence, each one heavier than the last. For decades, she has balanced between resistance and compromise, bowing at times to foreign demands, yielding territory, paying indemnities, always with the hope of preserving the dynasty a little longer. But the Boxers offer something different. The raw fury of the people, a wave too strong to ignore. She hesitates. To embrace them is to risk war with the foreign powers, whose armies are larger, better armed, relentless. To reject them is to alienate the very people who still cry her name in loyalty. Survival and sovereignty are at odds, and the choice between them carves its mark upon her heart. The year 1900 bleeds into fire. The Boxers swell in confidence, striking not only at foreigners but at Chinese Christians, seen as betrayers of their ancestors. Whole villages burn. Fear spreads like wind across dry fields. Foreign envoys in Beijing send desperate messages home. Protect us, avenge us, send armies. At last, Cixi makes her decision. In the grand halls where the throne gleams beneath carved dragons, she issues her decree. The Qing will support the Boxers. She frames it not as rebellion, but as righteous defense of the empire, a sacred struggle against the foreign encroachment that has humiliated China for decades. Soldiers are ordered to fight alongside the rebels. The dynasty throws its lot with the fists of the people. For a moment, the empire burns with unity. The cry of, "Support the Qing! Destroy the foreign!" shakes the walls of Beijing. The Boxers, barefoot and ragged, march beside imperial troops, convinced they are invincible. Gates are closed, railways cut, telegraph lines severed. To the world outside, it appears as though China has erupted into defiance. But fire, once loosed, does not easily obey. The Boxers' fury is chaotic, their power untrained. Foreign armies gather with precision and discipline, their weapons far beyond what fists and swords can withstand. The eight-nation alliance, Britain, France, Germany, Russia, the United States, Japan, Italy, and Austria-Hungary, unites against China. For the first time, these rival empires, often suspicious of one another, find common cause in crushing the rebellion that threatens their citizens and their privileges. They march toward Beijing. The summer sun beats down as foreign troops storm through northern provinces, their uniforms sharp, their rifles gleaming. Villages that had once cheered the Boxers now lie in ruins. The invincibility the rebels believed in crumbles beneath artillery fire. Spirit cannot stop steel, and the dreams of divine protection fall silent beneath the thunder of cannons. Inside Beijing, the tension thickens. Foreign legations are besieged, surrounded by Boxers and imperial troops. For weeks they hold out, firing back, rationing food, praying for relief. The city becomes a battlefield, the streets echoing with gunfire and screams. temples trembling under shellfire. She remains within the forbidden city, cloaked in layers of ceremony even as the world outside fractures. She receives reports of victories, then defeats, then disasters. She prays for the rebellion's strength, yet the truth presses heavier with each day. The foreign armies are advancing, and the empire is faltering. By August, the walls of Beijing tremble. The eight-nation alliance breaks through the city gates. Fire consumes streets, looting begins. Palaces and temples that have stood for centuries echo with foreign boots. The forbidden city, once untouchable, quakes with the sound of invasion. The air smells of smoke and fear. In that moment, survival overtakes sovereignty. She, who only weeks before had declared war upon the foreign powers, flees the city in disguise. Her robes are exchanged for plain garments, her entourage diminished, her pace hurried along dusty roads. An Empress Dowager becomes a fugitive, carried away from the capital she once ruled with such unyielding certainty. The Boxer's fire, once hailed as a divine wind, flickers into ashes. Their uprising is crushed, their faith broken, their bodies scattered across battlefields. The dynasty survives, but the cost is immeasurable. Indemnities heavier than before, foreign powers more entrenched, humiliation deeper, and yet, in memory, the Boxer's fire is not entirely extinguished. To some, it is a tragedy, a futile resistance crushed by the inevitability of modern weaponry. To others, it is a symbol, the cry of a people who, even in desperation, refuse to bow without struggle. Their fists, though broken, leave an imprint on history's page. For Cixi, the rebellion is another paradox, another lesson carved into the twilight of her reign. She gambled with fire, and it nearly consumed her. She sought survival through defiance, but found herself wandering the roads of exile. Once again, the dynasty endured, but thinner, weaker, more haunted than before. The forbidden city, when she left, was filled with shadows. Its marble courtyards, its dragon throne chambers, its vermilion walls, all bore the tremor of footsteps not her own. Even when she returns, the memory of foreign boots in the heart of Beijing will never fade. The empire she guards is no longer sealed by sacred gates. It has been broken open, its fragility laid bare to the world. The Boxer's fire, though brief, burns long in recollection. It shows the limits of fists against cannons, the danger of desperation harnessed by rulers, the frailty of sovereignty in an age of empires. It is a chapter of smoke and ruin, but also of stubborn defiance, a reminder that even in collapse, the human spirit does not go quietly. The Empress Dowager, once cloaked in fire, now finds herself cloaked in dust, fleeing along roads she never thought she would tread. And from this exile within her own empire, another chapter begins, one of wandering, resilience, and the struggle to return. The forbidden city, once the still heart of an empire, is no longer a sanctuary. Its vermilion gates, its golden roofs, its echoing courtyards, none can shield the throne from the marching boots of foreign soldiers. Smoke hangs in the summer air. Carried by rumors swifter than wind, the allied armies of 8 nations march on Beijing. The Empress Dowager Cixi, who has weathered storms and betrayals, who has ruled behind the curtain for decades, now faces the unthinkable. She cannot remain. Night cloaks the decision in silence. Torches flicker. Eunuchs whisper hurried commands. The Guangxu Emperor, her captive nephew, moves reluctantly, his will bound as tightly as his fate. She does not dress in imperial robes tonight. She is veiled, plain, almost invisible. To stay would mean capture, humiliation, perhaps the end of the dynasty itself. To leave is to gamble that even in retreat, she can still hold the empire's thread. The procession begins in secrecy. Wagons creak, horses stamp nervously, officials and soldiers, loyal or fearful, follow her into the darkness. Behind them, the city still holds its breath. Palaces that once rang with ceremony now surrender to silence. The Empress Dowager, who once sat enthroned beneath golden dragons, now rides disguised as a humble widow, hidden in the shadows of her own empire. The roads beyond Beijing are heavy with dust. Summer heat presses down, and the carriages sway unevenly over ruts. Villagers peer from doorways as the strange company passes. Soldiers with wary eyes, courtiers stripped of grandeur, and in their midst a woman in plain garments whose presence none dare name. Few know the truth, that the pulse of the empire travels this road, clothed in disguise, guarded yet vulnerable. For the first time in decades, Cixi feels the ground not as polished stone, but as living earth. She breathes the scent of soil and sweat, hears the barking of dogs in unseen courtyards, the cries of children in villages not yet touched by flames. She is Empress Dowager still, yet here, beyond the city's walls. Her throne has turned to a jolting cart, her audience to peasants watching from fields. The rebellion she once encouraged, the boxers with their fervent fists, their chants of invincibility, has faltered beneath the weight of foreign cannon. Their belief in spirits cannot withstand rifles from across the seas. And now she, the woman who had played with their fire, walks among ashes of her own making. Yet even in this recognition, there is no surrender. The dynasty may bend, but she refuses to let it shatter. Each mile stretches into memory. Cixi recalls another journey, years ago, when she had entered the forbidden city as a young concubine, her fate uncertain. She had once travelled in hope. Now she travels in survival. But the will that carried her from obscurity to the highest chamber of power remains unbroken. She thinks of her son, the boy emperor who had died too young, and of Guangxu, whose fragile throne rests upon her decisions. She thinks of the empire, vast, fractured, yet still hers to hold. In dusty towns, the court in exile halts to rest. The people see officials weary and thin, their silks dulled by road dust. They see soldiers guarding wagons of treasure hastily packed, banners hidden from view. Some recognize her, whispers spreading like wildfire. The Empress Dowager, they murmur, is among them. Some curse her name, blaming her for calamity. Others bow, clinging to the idea that even in exile, she remains the mandate's vessel. Food grows scarce. Carriages break down. At times she dismounts, walking beside her attendants, her feet touching the same dirt as farmers and beggars. It is exile, yet it is also revelation. She tastes the same hunger, breathes the same air, and feels the same uncertainty as the millions she rules. For a woman long enclosed by walls of jade and ritual, the open road is both humiliation and harsh education. Her entourage reaches Xi'an, the ancient capital, once the seat of emperors whose tombs lie beneath eternal mounds. Here, amid relics of a dynasty long gone, she finds temporary refuge. The city becomes a mirror of her condition, aged, weathered, distant from power, yet steeped in memory. From here, she writes edicts in the emperor's name, decrees that still claim the empire's command even as foreign troops occupy the heart of Beijing. It is a strange paradox. In exile, her authority survives. The dynasty still breathes because she breathes. Ministers gather. taking their orders from a woman seated not upon a throne, but on a borrowed chair. Letters are sealed, envoys dispatched. Even from the fringes, she weaves strands of control, ensuring the dynasty's voice has not fallen silent. Meanwhile, Beijing suffers. Reports reach her ears, palaces looted, treasures stolen, temples desecrated. Foreign soldiers feast where emperors once dined, their boots staining marble once walked by concubines and mandarins. The Forbidden City, the very symbol of celestial order, becomes a playground of occupation. Each message pierces her, yet she endures. She knows that symbols can be restored. What matters is survival. What matters is the dynasty's breath continuing in exile until the tide turns. Cixi learns to wield patience as a weapon. She sends envoys to negotiate, to plead, to balance humiliation against necessity. She swallows pride when required, even as fury burns within. She begins to see that survival, not purity, is the measure of strength. And so she endures, bending like bamboo in storm winds, rooted though shaken. Months pass. The Allied powers, divided by their own ambitions, cannot rule China directly. They wish to punish, to humiliate, but not to destroy. Slowly, the possibility of return arises. Reparations will be demanded, concessions signed, but the throne can still stand. And so, from exile, she begins to prepare the path home. The journey that began in fear becomes a testament. She has fled, yes, but she has not vanished. In dust and hunger, she has discovered a truth. That power does not dwell solely in palaces or titles. It dwells in endurance, in the ability to bend without breaking, in the refusal to surrender one's claim to destiny. And so Cixi, the Empress Dowager, exiled in her own empire, emerges not as a broken ruler, but as one hardened by fire and road. She has walked as fugitive and yet remained sovereign. She has felt the fragility of her rule, and yet strengthened her grip. When at last she returns to Beijing, it will not be as a queen untouched by storm, but as a survivor who has carried her empire through its lowest valley. The Forbidden City will open its gates again, but she will never forget the dust of exile, the cries of peasants, the weight of hunger shared with the nameless. For in those days of wandering, she learned what it means to hold an empire not as possession, but as burden. And though the world mocks her weakness, she knows within herself that survival itself is victory. Exile teaches her resilience, but also a new kind of fear that the world beyond China's walls is changing faster than she can bend it to her will. And so, as she turns her face back toward Beijing, the question lingers like twilight smoke. Can survival alone be enough when an empire trembles at the edge of a new century? The roads to Beijing are heavy with memory. They carry dust from flight and defeat, dust that clings still to the robes of those who once fled in secrecy, disguised as wanderers of their own empire. Now, the procession winds slowly back, not triumphant, not festive, but deliberate, cautious, and necessary. Cixi returns to the Forbidden City, yet it is not the same city she once commanded. Its golden roofs shimmer beneath the sun, but the air is pierced by echoes of foreign drums, the shadows of new powers now entrenched within its walls. The Boxer rebellion has passed like a storm, fierce, consuming, and devastating. Villages once sang of righteous fists raised against foreign intrusion. Beijing, once confident in its citadel walls, fell to soldiers from distant nations. 8 foreign powers marched through gates thought eternal, their flags planted where dragons once held dominion. The Forbidden City itself, sacred to centuries of emperors, trembled beneath foreign boots. And Cixi, who once ruled from the center of this enclosed world, was forced to flee into the countryside, stripped of majesty, a sovereign turned fugitive. Now she returns. Her palanquin sways gently as it passes through the vermilion gates. The city greets her not with cheers, but with silence broken only by the murmur of soldiers who stand where eunuchs once guarded. The palace that once belonged solely to the Son of Heaven is now shared with men who speak in foreign tongues, whose uniforms glitter with brass and steel. The dynasty is still alive, but its aura has fractured. The dragon throne remains in place, but the room is colder, its authority tempered by treaties signed in desperation. The return is a balancing act. Cixi, she knows the empire cannot rise in defiance. Its armies are shattered, its coffers drained, its people weary. She must rebuild, not from triumph, but from concession. The foreign powers demand reparations, rivers of silver to flow from China's treasury for years to come. They demand legations within Beijing, fortresses of influence planted at the empire's heart. They demand the right to guard railways and rivers, to carve new pathways into the ancient body of the Middle Kingdom. The old empress bends but does not break. Her first act is one of presence. She moves slowly through the palace, reoccupying its chambers with deliberate ceremony. The throne room is dusted, the banners rehung, incense lit to reclaim the air. Eunuchs bow low, their voices trembling with renewed loyalty, though the silence behind their eyes tells another story. Ministers return to her side, some with relief, others with hesitation, for they know her hand is steady, but her power is altered. Cixi gathers the court and speaks with a voice that carries both steel and velvet. She does not deny the humiliation of exile, nor the scars left by foreign guns. Instead, she reframes survival as resilience. The dragon bends with the wind, she reminds them, but it does not cease to be the dragon. In her words, weakness becomes endurance, and concession becomes strategy. The dynasty will continue, perhaps not as it once was, but still as the soul of China. Foreign ambassadors now walk the same courtyards as imperial officials, where once only mandarins in embroidered robes conferred beneath painted beams. Now men with pale faces and Western suits stand as equals. Their presence is both intrusion and inevitability. They hold the signatures of treaties inked with blood and defeat, and their eyes see Beijing not as the forbidden city, but as a city of negotiation and leverage. Cixi adapts. She does not openly resist. She observes, she listens, she weighs. She entertains audiences with these foreigners, speaking through interpreters, her gaze unblinking as she measures their ambitions. To some, she offers courtesy. To others, cold formality. She knows each concession bought is another year for the dynasty, another breath for the empire still clinging to life. Yet even as she concedes, she remembers the old rituals. She restores the rites at the temple of heaven, where emperors have long prayed for harmony between earth and sky. She orders the gardens of the summer palace tended once more, lilies placed upon waters that have seen both splendor and ruin. These gestures are more than vanity. They are reminders to herself and to her people that tradition still has a pulse, that memory still binds the empire's heart. The people, too, watch her return with conflicted eyes. Some whisper blame, recalling how she fled as Beijing burned, how soldiers from distant shores occupied the sacred heart of China. Others see in her return a sign of resilience, a phoenix perched again upon the ashes of calamity. In the villages, Peasants still bow before her name, even if their fields suffer under the weight of taxes demanded by foreign reparations. For them, the dynasty remains a thread of continuity, and Cixi its keeper. Night in the Forbidden City is different now. Where once silence ruled, now gunfire echoes faintly from foreign barracks. The glow of lanterns within legations competes with the soft light of palace candles. The stars above, eternal and indifferent, watch both worlds coexist, the old dragon and the new intruders, within the same ancient walls. Cixi lies awake, listening. She knows the dynasty's days of supreme isolation are gone. The Middle Kingdom has been forced into the world beyond its walls, pulled into tides of modernity, trade, and power it cannot control. Yet she also knows that as long as she holds her seat, she can shape how the empire adapts. She can negotiate delay, soften. She can weave compromise as one weaves silk, thread by thread, fragile yet binding. Her strategy is not grand reform nor sudden change. It is survival. She knows that history remembers conquerors and revolutionaries, but it also remembers those who endured long enough to pass the torch. She seeks not glory, but continuity, even if that continuity is tinged with loss. As months pass, the court regains its rhythm, though it beats to a new and altered tempo. Edicts are issued, audiences held, banquets arranged. But the presence of foreigners lingers always, their carriages clattering along palace roads, their banners fluttering where none should fly. The palace is still the forbidden city, but the word forbidden has lost its meaning. And yet, through all of this, Cixi holds her place. She sits upon the dragon throne, robed in silks embroidered with phoenixes, her gaze unwavering. She is not what she once was, the unchallenged center of the empire, but neither is she defeated. She has turned calamity into survival, exile into return. She has walked through humiliation and emerged still clothed in authority, if not in supremacy. The return to Beijing is not a restoration of glory. It is the beginning of something else, a fragile balance between survival and surrender, tradition and intrusion. It is an empire reimagined not through strength, but through adaptation. Cixi, for all her faults and failings, embodies that adaptation. She bends, but she does not break. And so the palace breathes again, though its breath is shallow. The dragon throne still gleams, though its power is halved. The dynasty remains, though its shadow is lengthened by the silhouettes of foreign banners. History has shifted, and Cixi, seated at its center, shifts with it. Yet even as she steadies the throne, a quiet realization dawns. That survival alone is not enough. In the twilight of her reign, new reforms will whisper through the court, late and urgent, as if trying to catch time already lost. The years have slowed her step, yet the weight of rule does not grow lighter. In the twilight of her reign, Cixi turns her gaze not only backward, toward memories of flight and survival, but forward, toward the shape of a future she will never fully walk into. The Forbidden City, which once seemed eternal in its isolation, is no longer untouched. Its courtyards hum with whispers of change. Change demanded not just by foreign powers, but by the restless spirit of China itself. The return from exile has left scars. The humiliation of defeat, the cost of reparations, the visible presence of foreign legations in Beijing. All these remind the dynasty that the old ways cannot endure unbent. The empire has stretched its endurance to the very edge. If it is to breathe another century, it must find new air. And so, in the dusk of her life, The woman who once clung fiercely to tradition now becomes, almost reluctantly, a patron of reform. The reforms arrive like lanterns lit hurriedly in a gathering darkness. Schools are founded not only to teach the Confucian classics, but to introduce mathematics, science, and foreign languages. Young men who once would have memorized ancient odes now learn to pass Western military drills or study the principles of constitutional law. For centuries, the imperial examinations tested only the wisdom of the ancients. Now, they begin to dissolve, replaced by a system that looks outward as well as inward. The army, too, becomes a canvas of reform. The dynasty has seen the power of foreign guns, the iron of their warships, the precision of their rifles. The old banner troops, once symbols of Manchu pride, stand brittle and outmatched. Cixi gives her blessing to the creation of modernized forces. Drilled in Western style, armed with new weapons, clothed not in silken robes, but in uniforms stitched for war. It is not enough to erase the gap, but it is enough to signal that the empire knows it must learn or perish. Railways stretch across the land, iron veins laid into earth that once resisted such intrusion. Telegraph wires hum faintly, carrying words faster than any messenger on horseback could ride. Mines are dug, factories flicker to life, and the first fragile outlines of industry appear in landscapes long ruled by ploughs and markets. The empire begins to move at a quicker pace, though the rhythm is uneven, like a drumbeat struck by hesitant hands. Yet for all this change, time is cruel. The reforms are late, perhaps too late. Every step forward is shadowed by resistance. Conservative voices still murmur in court, wary of the speed of transformation, fearful of the erosion of traditions that defined the empire for millennia. Each decree faces obstacles. Each new law is tempered by compromise. Reform in this twilight is not the bold gallop of a young horse, but the careful tread of an old dragon testing each stone on the river before placing its weight. Cixi herself embodies this paradox. She who once halted the 100 days of reform, fearing its fire would consume the throne, now kindles smaller flames of change. She sponsors schools for girls, a gesture unthinkable in earlier decades. She approves naval expansion, though she once diverted funds to marble and gardens. She listens to ministers who speak of constitutions and assemblies, though always she holds the final word, wary of yielding more than she must. At night, she reflects. Age has softened her sharpness, though it has not dulled her will. She thinks of what might have been had these reforms taken root earlier, when the dynasty was stronger, when foreign powers were less entrenched, when her own hand was steadier. She does not confess regret aloud. Emperors and empresses do not speak so plainly, but the silence in her chambers holds it for her. Regret becomes a ghost that follows her through the lantern-lit halls. She remembers the Guangxu emperor, her nephew, whose brief moment of reform she once extinguished. Now, in his quiet imprisonment, his vision lingers like an echo. She walks past the chambers where he resides under watch, and for a moment her gaze lingers on the door. She knows he dreamed of a China remade, a China that could stand unbowed in the world. She wonders, perhaps, if she has lived long enough to see that dream return in fragments, softened and reshaped by her own hand. The thought weighs heavily, for she knows she denied him his chance, only to pursue her own, years later, when time was already slipping. Beyond the palace, the people feel these changes unevenly. In cities, young scholars debate new ideas in tea houses. They speak of parliaments and republics, of Japan's sudden rise after its own reforms, of the fragile thread on which the dynasty now hangs. In villages, the rhythms of life change more slowly. A new school may open nearby. A railway may cut across a field once planted with wheat. For many, these reforms are distant ripples, felt but not fully understood. Yet the sense grows that the world is turning, and China must turn with it. The foreign powers watch with interest, some with approval, others with suspicion. They see in these reforms both opportunity and threat. A stronger China might resist their encroachments. A weaker one might collapse too soon, scattering benefits they still hope to reap. Their presence in Beijing remains a constant reminder that even in reform, the dynasty is not fully free. Still, in the midst of all this, there is a quiet dignity in Cixi's final efforts. She does not abandon her throne to despair, nor does she retreat fully into gardens and illusions. She works, however imperfectly, to leave behind not only a memory of survival, but a framework, however fragile, for the empire's future. Her reforms are seeds scattered at dusk. Some may sprout, others may wither, but the act of scattering them marks a shift from mere endurance to a gesture of renewal. The Forbidden City, in her last years, holds this paradox in its very air. The vermilion gates are still guarded by dragon carvings, yet the conversations within speak of constitutions, assemblies, and railways. The court still bows to ancient rituals, yet outside, telegraphs hum and factories grind. Old and new coexist uneasily, like two voices singing in different keys, yet bound within the same song. Cixi walks these courtyards slowly now, her body frailer, her breath shallower. Yet her eyes remain sharp, her mind calculating. She knows she is approaching her end, and she knows the dynasty is approaching its own. But she also knows that the flicker of reform, faint as it may be, has entered the empire's dusk, and perhaps she thinks that is enough. For history will not remember her as a perfect reformer, nor as a flawless ruler. It will remember her as a woman who held the dynasty through storms, who bent when bending was the only path, who yielded reluctantly to change when change was unavoidable. It will remember her regrets as much as her achievements. And perhaps, in that balance, her humanity is revealed. The humanity of one who struggled, erred, endured, and, in the end, sought to leave something behind. The empire glows faintly in its last light, a lantern flickering in the wind, and at its center, the last empress sits, surrounded by both the grandeur of tradition and the whispers of transformation. Her life has been long, her reign complex, her choices heavy, but as dusk deepens into night, she allows herself one last thought, that even in regret there can be renewal. And even in twilight, there can be a dawn waiting beyond her reach. And as the shadows lengthen in her final years, the last curtain begins to stir, for death draws near, and with it the silent, sudden end of both an emperor and the empress who shaped his fate. The Forbidden City grows quieter with each season. Its halls, once filled with the bustle of ministers, eunuchs, and guards, now echo more softly, like an old instrument that has lost its resonance. Time has dimmed the brilliance of its vermilion gates and faded the lacquer of its thrones. And within these walls, where the empire has lived and breathed for centuries, the last empress waits for her final dusk. Cixi is aged now, her once commanding presence reduced by years of struggle and survival. Yet her eyes still gleam, dark and sharp, As if unwilling to surrender to the dullness of decline, she has endured storms that would have crushed lesser figures, rebellions, foreign invasions, betrayals from within her court. She has bent and endured, sometimes ruthlessly, sometimes reluctantly. Now her body falters, but her will remains, steady as the flicker of a candle refusing to be extinguished. The Guangxu Emperor, her nephew and nominal ruler, is also fading. His health has long been frail, and his spirit, bound by years of confinement, his reforms stifled, his voice subdued, carries the weariness of captivity. Though the throne is his in name, the weight of empire has always been hers. Yet in the twilight of their lives, their fates are strangely intertwined, as though history itself has bound their last breaths into one final chapter. It is the autumn of 1908. Leaves drift through the courtyards of the Forbidden City, settling against carved stone lions and the steps of marble bridges. The skies hang low, grey with the season, as if nature itself mourns in advance. Inside, the Guangxu Emperor takes to his bed, his body racked with illness. Doctors whisper of weakness in his pulse, of a decline that seems sudden and yet long in the making. Within days, his life slips away. He dies on November 14th. The court is stunned, though whispers rush through the corridors with unsettling speed. How could he die so suddenly? The young man whose life, though restrained, seemed not yet near its end. Some suggest nature has claimed him, that his fragile health has finally failed. Others murmur darker tales, that the Empress Dowager, sensing her own end, could not bear to leave him behind as a rival or a source of instability. They speak of poison, of a final act of control that ensured her authority would not outlive her. No proof is ever shown, no confession ever given. Only rumour, carried like incense smoke through the palace, clings to her name. And so, as with so much of her life, certainty is denied and ambiguity reigns. One day later, on November 15th, Cixi herself falls ill beyond recovery. Her breath shortens, her body weakens, and the woman who once ruled an empire from behind a curtain feels the nearness of her own last curtain. Eunuchs rush about, physicians attend, but nothing can halt the inevitable. After decades of shaping the dynasty's course, she approaches her end. In her final hours, she remains deliberate. Even as life drains from her, she issues her last edict, naming the child Pui, barely 3 years old, as the new Emperor of China. The choice is not accidental. By placing a child upon the throne once more, she ensures that no grown rival can seize power at the moment of her passing. She repeats the strategy that had first given her authority decades earlier, when a boy emperor opened the door for her regency. Even in her dying breath, she is calculating, securing continuity as she has always done. The palace is thick with silence, broken only by the soft rustle of silk robes and the muffled weeping of attendants. Ministers bow low, their faces grave, as word spreads that the woman who held the empire's fate for nearly half a century has taken her last breath. She dies in the Hall of Graceful Bird, her body frail but her legacy vast, leaving behind a China transformed and wounded, enduring and fragile. Her death is not just the passing of a ruler, it is the end of an era. For nearly 5 decades, she has been the hidden axis of the Qing Dynasty, the shadow behind the throne, the voice from behind the curtain. With her gone, the dynasty is left vulnerable, its walls already crumbling, its enemies circling closer. The Guangxu Emperor lies dead as well, his death forever tied to hers in the memory of the people. Rumors continue to coil around them both, whispered in markets, in tea houses, in secret gathering, that she poisoned him with mercury, that she feared he might rise in her absence to undo her authority, that she wished to silence him forever. Whether truth or invention, the story becomes part of her legacy, inseparable from the image of her final days. The Forbidden City mourns with ritual precision. Drums echo across its courtyards, banners are draped in black, and officials wear mourning robes of white. Incense burns constantly, curling smoke into the cold air, as if carrying the soul of the Empress toward the heavens. Her coffin is prepared with the grandeur befitting one who shaped dynasties. Precious woods and silks, golden fittings and lacquered carvings, all are arranged to honor the woman who once commanded with a glance, who once determined the fates of emperors and generals alike. Yet beneath the ceremony lies a quiet unease. The dynasty has survived her life through endurance and compromise, but can it survive her absence? The child emperor, Po Yi, is far too young to understand the throne he now inherits. The court is divided, foreign powers remain entrenched, and reformers whisper of change that no longer waits for permission. The dragon throne glimmers still, but the empire it represents trembles at the edge of collapse. For those who loved her, or at least served her loyally, Cixi's death brings sorrow. She is remembered as a woman of unshakable will, who guided the dynasty through crisis after crisis. For those who opposed her or resented her control, her passing is seen as a release, the end of an era of obstruction. And for the common people, her legacy is a mixture of awe and blame. Awe for her survival, blame for the dynasty's decline. Time, as always, will judge more slowly than rumor. It will remember her as both tyrant and savior, as a woman who built marble boats while her navy rotted, yet who also preserved the dynasty through tempests that might have destroyed it far sooner. It will remember her as ruthless, pragmatic, indulgent, cunning. But above all, it will remember her as the last empress, the final great figure to hold power within the Forbidden City before the dynasty itself dissolved into history. The halls of the palace, now cloaked in mourning, seem to absorb her absence. Where once ministers bent low before her throne, now an empty space lingers. The golden dragons carved upon beams and walls seem to coil more tightly, as though they too sense the weight of an ending. The last curtain has fallen, and behind it lies not only the silence of death, but the silence of an empire on the brink. Beyond the walls of Beijing, change is already stirring. In the provinces, revolutionaries gather, their voices growing bolder. New schools spread ideas of constitutionalism and republicanism. Newspapers carry the seeds of dissent carried on ink as swiftly as the telegraph hums across wires. The dynasty Cixi spent her life preserving now faces challenges greater than even she could contain. Her death marks the beginning of its final descent. And yet, in the candlelight of her funeral rites, there is also an air of timelessness. The ritual bows, the incense, the chanting of monks, the carefully ordered processions. All these connect her to centuries of emperors and empresses before her. Though the world outside has changed, within these walls the rhythm of tradition continues, at least for this moment. It is as though the dynasty, before it falls, takes one last deep breath, honoring the woman who carried its twilight. Cixi's story ends here, in the quiet chambers of the Forbidden City, beneath golden roofs that have seen centuries of triumph and sorrow. Her life has been long, her reign complex, Her legacy uncertain. She dies as she lived, commanding, enigmatic, leaving behind both admiration and suspicion. The last curtain falls, and with it the empire moves one step closer to its end. And as her coffin rests in the halls of the forbidden city, the echoes of her reign linger, soon to fade into the crumbling of the dynasty itself, a collapse that will leave only memory, marble, and whispers of an empress who once ruled at dusk. The forbidden city exhales slowly, as if even its stones know the weight of history pressing upon them. In the winter after Cixi's death, silence seeps through the vermilion gates, broken only by the faint shuffle of courtiers whose steps sound like whispers along corridors heavy with absence. The Dragon Throne, that seat of near, mystical sovereignty, belongs now to a boy, a child barely 3 years old, with wide, unknowing eyes that blink against the blinding sweep of ceremony. His name is Puyi, and he will be the last emperor of China. The contrast is almost unbearable. For nearly half a century, Cixi had ruled from the shadows, her presence commanding ministers and armies alike, her will setting the course of an empire in storm and in dusk. Now the throne holds a toddler, a symbol of continuity too fragile to withstand the storms gathering beyond the palace walls. History has a cruel rhythm. The moment the last great hand releases its grip, the entire structure begins to tremble. In the months that follow, the empire lurches. The Qing Dynasty, already fractured by rebellions, foreign intrusion, and the weight of its own inertia, begins to unravel. Provincial armies, long held tenuously loyal, look more to their commanders than to the throne. Reformers, emboldened by the memory of the 100 Days, reform, whisper once more of constitutions and republics. Revolutionaries spread pamphlets like embers across the land. The great dragon banner, once unyielding, now flickers in the wind. Yet even in this collapse, Cixi's presence lingers. Her marble boat at the summer palace still gleams, its frozen hull a strange monument to her taste and power. A vessel that would never sail, yet was meant to suggest eternal stability. The painted halls she restored still bear her touch, the carefully chosen flowers in their patterns speaking of her fondness for beauty amid decline. Visitors to Beijing in these years remark on the strange paradox, an empire visibly crumbling, and yet adorned by the delicate traces of a woman who had once seemed unshakable. Her legacy becomes a mirror, reflecting whatever the viewer brings to it. To some, she is remembered as the tyrant who strangled reform, who clung to power at the expense of a nation's renewal. To others, she is the savior who, in her own pragmatic way, kept the empire alive far longer than it might otherwise have survived, buying time against impossible odds. And to yet others, she is simply a survivor, a woman navigating a world built to exclude her, who bent the rules until they broke, carving her name into a story that would otherwise have erased her. But history is rarely gentle. Within only 3 years of her death, the dynasty she protected with such ferocity falls. The 1911 revolution ignites in Wuhan, spreading like fire through the provinces. Governors declare independence, soldiers mutiny, and the child Emperor Puyi, whose tiny feet had barely touched the ground of his palace, becomes a monarch only in name. By 1912, the dragon banner is lowered and the Republic of China is declared. The mandate of heaven, that ethereal thread linking ruler to cosmos, has finally snapped, and yet, in the ruins, Cixi's shadow remains. Even revolutionaries, when they speak of the dynasty's fall, cannot help but mention her. They cast her as the embodiment of decay, the final architect of a doomed dynasty. Others, looking back with more tempered eyes, wonder if she had in fact delayed the inevitable collapse, if without her cunning and ruthlessness, the Qing might have ended decades earlier, swallowed by the Taiping rebellion or shattered under the weight of the foreign incursions. Her story is told and retold, reshaped each time. In the popular imagination of the early republic, she becomes a figure of villainy, a woman who poisoned emperors and played with power like a deadly game. Later, scholars reassess her, a product of her time, constrained by tradition, yet more adaptable than many of her male contemporaries. Was she cruel or simply pragmatic? Was she a destroyer or the last bulwark of a crumbling world? The questions swirl like incense smoke, refusing to settle. One cannot help but see poetry in the irony. The woman accused of obstructing reform dies, just as reforms begin to take root in earnest. The woman who kept a boy on the throne to control him is followed by a boy who becomes emperor only to preside over the end. The cycle of power repeats, but weaker each time, until the curtain falls completely. Walking through the Forbidden City today, one feels her presence still. The throne room where she sat hidden behind a yellow screen seems to echo with the rustle of silks and the hushed voices of courtiers. The gardens where she strolled carry the faint memory of her gaze, the way she would look upon peonies and lotus flowers with the same calculation she gave to armies and treaties. Even the stones themselves, warmed by centuries of footsteps, hold the echo of her authority, the pulse of a woman who defied expectations and ruled an empire not meant for her. And yet, for all her grandeur, her story ends with a silence that borders on tragic. She had feared irrelevance more than anything, and in a sense, her fear came true. The dynasty ended, the throne dissolved, and the world moved on to republics, revolutions, and new visions of China. Still, her figure lingers in the collective memory, not erased, not forgotten. She is a ghost that refuses to fade, haunting the threshold between empire and modernity. The marble boat, unmoving, captures it best. A vessel built for eternity, yet unable to sail. A monument to stability, yet also a symbol of futility. It is Cixi's paradox carved in stone. Beauty and fragility, grandeur and decline, permanence and impermanence entwined. Visitors gaze upon it and see her story, a rain that glittered, resisted, endured, but could not prevent the tide from shifting. As night settles over Beijing, one can imagine her spirit moving quietly through the palace halls, pausing to listen to the distant murmurs of history. Did she, in her final breath, suspect how quickly the dynasty would fall after her? Did she believe her reforms, too late though they were, might carry the empire forward? Or did she, pragmatic as ever, accept that all she could do was buy time, knowing the ending had already been written? The questions remain unanswered. Yet perhaps that is fitting. For some figures in history, certainty is a cage too small. She resists simplicity. She exists instead as an echo, sharp, soft, enduring, elusive. And so the Forbidden City, once the beating heart of empire, becomes a museum of echoes, where the memory of an empress lingers even as the world marches into modernity. From her silence rises a question that outlives her reign. When the past falls into shadow, do we remember it as warning or as mirror? And so, the story of the last Empress of China drifts into silence. A woman who entered history as a concubine and departed as the figure who carried an empire through its twilight. She was not the first to shape history unseen, nor the last to leave her shadow across the halls of power. Yet within her life, we glimpse something more enduring than titles or palaces. The fragility of power, the stubbornness of tradition, and the quiet resilience of the human spirit. Though centuries have passed, her echo still hums in the quiet. The marble boats and painted gardens may have faded, but the questions her life asks of us, about change, about survival, about the delicate dance of time, remain. And so the candle of that night burns quietly in time, its flame still flickering across memory. Thank you, dear listener, for sharing this stillness with me tonight. It is no small thing, in a world that asks so much of us, to pause and simply listen. Your presence here turns history into more than a story. It becomes a thread between us, spun across distance and woven softly into the fabric of night. Now, I invite you to rest, to loosen your hold on the day, to let the noise of the world dissolve into something gentler. May your dreams carry you kindly, as though you are being led through quiet corridors, lit only by lanterns, safe and unhurried. This has been the Sleeping Hourglass, where the past tucks you in. If this brought you peace, you are always welcome to return, to let another story carry you softly toward rest. And for now, sleep well, beneath the hush of history's lullaby.